Our gospel reading this morning, according to the bulletin, is supposed to be Matthew 14, verses 13 through 21. Verse 13 starts this way. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew, which makes me go, what did he hear? So we're going to start on verse 1. So we hear what Jesus heard before he withdrew. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus. And he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she may ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was grieved. Yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it. And then they went and told Jesus. Now, when Jesus had heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up into heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave it to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there to a deserted place by himself. Isn't that what most of us do or wish we could do when we hear heartbreaking news? We withdraw. We close in on ourselves. We seek the comfort of loneliness over the chaos of community. We don't want to hear the well-intended but often mistakenly cruel comments of friends searching desperately to find a way to bring comfort, but having not the right words. We just want to be left alone. That's where Jesus was. That was his emotional state when he heard that John the Baptist had been killed. He'd been baptized by John, was a cousin of John, was a defender of John. And don't you think that it might have crossed his mind that his death might be next? That it wouldn't be a very long time before he found himself in the death grip of the powerful, facing an unwarranted and vengeful execution. John should have known better than mix faith and politics. He knew the fate of the prophets who had come before him. He knew what happens when one speaks the truth to power. There will always be someone, some group, that will be out to discredit you, out to slander you, or perhaps even kill you. John should have known not to mix faith and politics, but he could not, would not. He knew if he didn't raise his voice, likely no one else would. If he allowed such injustice to stand, it would surely grow. Everyone knew that it was wrong for King Herod to be with his brother's wife, Herodias. But apparently John was the only one, or at least the primary voice crying in the wilderness. And Herodias was not happy about it, about John. She had him arrested, but that was not enough. His voice still emanated through the prison walls. So when the opportunity arose, she took full advantage. She knew that Herod had put himself in a bad place. She knew that he had made a promise that he would regret. But she didn't care what it did to her lover. She only cared about the death of John the Baptist. And the king didn't have the integrity to do what was right, only what was expedient. And when Jesus heard it, heard that Herodias had been successful, all he wanted to do was get away. Now, I would never claim that Jesus somehow lost faith, but I can't help wonder if this death didn't give him pause. It's no different for us, is it? When we hear those words we thought we would never hear, don't we question everything? Sometimes including our faith. We somehow begin to entertain the idea that God is out to get us, that God is testing us, that God cannot be love and let this happen. That if God is in control, that if God has a plan, that if God is in charge, then why is God letting this happen to us? That impulse does not make us weak. It makes us human. The Psalms are full of songs of sadness, of denial, of accusation. When Jesus Herodias, the high priest Caiaphas, has finally got Jesus just where he wants him, hanging on a cross, Jesus turns to Psalm 22, crying out, my God, why have you deserted me? But on the way to being alone, being isolated, being comforted by silence, the world pulls us back, refusing to just let us be. Jesus, before he even gets off the boat, is surrounded by the crowd that has shown up, not to offer comfort, not to grieve with him, not to sit in silence as the friends of Job had done, not to rise up as an army to take on the king and his court. They came expecting him to do something for them. Some wanted to be healed. Some wanted to be inspired. Some wanted to hear him weave his stories of humor, pointing out the foibles of the high and mighty. And Matthew tells us Jesus had compassion for them. They should have had compassion for him. But he has compassion for them. He puts their needs before his own desire. He doesn't wallow or get angry. He acts. He loves them, has compassion for them, and his love for them trumps his need to get away. If our phrase from last week, Leah had lovely eyes, is the saddest phrase in the Bible, then he had compassion for them may well be the most joyful. In the midst of everything else in Jesus' life, Jesus acts out the never-failing love of God in his actions. And a time when there may have seemed to be a scarcity of God's love. For how could God let John the Baptist be killed? Jesus demonstrates the abundance of God's love. And not only is there enough love to go around, there are leftovers of love. This is a Thanksgiving story, like the holiday with carved turkey and all the trimmings, where the leftovers are craved even while we are enjoying the Thanksgiving meal, because we know that cold turkey sandwich tomorrow with the cranberries and maybe a little bit of dressing will be tastier than the hot meal we're having today. And we plan ahead, don't we? We make certain the turkey is big enough for there to be plenty of leftovers to share. Yes, this is a Thanksgiving story. Like the feast we will shortly share. Even as Jesus took bread and fish, looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves at the meal on the shore of Galilee, Jesus will bless the bread and give thanks for the cup as we share in this Thanksgiving meal of abundance this morning. There is no question that Jesus' heart was broken that day. And the cure for that broken heart was not what he thought he needed. He thought he needed to get away, to be alone. But what he really needed was to be needed. To get right back serving. To get right back at demonstrating that God's love is stronger than the trouble of the day, of any day, of every day, and that there will be more than 12 baskets of leftover love. Amen.